Dust swirled across the barren landscape as 17-year-old James Mitchell squinted against the harsh Wyoming sun, his lean frame perched on the weathered porch railing of the modest ranch house. Every day for the past 3 weeks, he'd maintained his vigil, waiting for a glimpse of the wagon that would bring Hannah Lawson back to Wildroot Creek. It was 1875, and the frontier was unforgiving to those who couldn't adapt, but young James had the stubbornness of his father, Jonathan Mitchell, one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. "She's coming back, I know it," James declared to his father, who stood in the doorway with a worried expression etched into his sun-weathered face. Jonathan Mitchell sighed, adjusting his worn Stetson. At 42, he'd seen enough of life to know that hope often led to heartbreak, especially in these untamed lands. "Son, the Lawsons left for California almost a month ago. Hannah's father made it clear they weren't returning." "You don't understand, Pa," she promised. James's voice held the unshakable conviction of youth. Her father might have dragged them west, but Hannah swore she'd find a way back. She wouldn't break her word. Jonathan watched his son with a mixture of concern and admiration. Since his wife's passing 5 years ago from fever, James had been his world, the only family he had left in this vast, unforgiving territory. The boy had his mother's eyes and her unwavering faith in people. Perhaps that's what worried Jonathan most. "I've got to check the north pasture," Jonathan said, stepping off the porch. "Those new calves need looking after. Will you help me, or are you planning to spend another day watching an empty horizon?" James shook his head. "I'll wait a bit longer. I promised her I'd be here when she returned." Jonathan nodded, knowing there was no sense arguing. "At least come in before sundown. Wolves have been spotted close to the property." As his father disappeared toward the stables, James settled back against the porch post. His mind drifted to Hannah, her bright hazel eyes, her laugh that seemed to chase away the loneliness of frontier life, and the way she'd kiss his cheek goodbye the day her family's wagon had pulled away. 3 weeks, she had whispered. "I'll find a way back in 3 weeks." "Wait for me, James Mitchell." Today marked exactly 3 weeks. The sound of approaching hooves pulled James from his thoughts. His heart leapt as he straightened, but it was only Henry Lawson, the town's postal carrier, not related to Hannah despite sharing her surname. "Afternoon, James," Henry called, dismounting his horse. "Got a letter for your pa." James nodded, taking the envelope. "Any news from the west? Any wagons heading this way?" Henry shook his head. "Roads are quiet. That stage robbery last week has folks hesitant to travel." He paused, studying James's hopeful expression. "Still waiting on that Lawson girl, aren't you?" "She's coming back," James replied firmly. Henry's eyes softened with sympathy. "James, I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but word came through that the Lawson family reached Sacramento safely. They've settled there already." James felt his chest tighten but kept his expression neutral. "That doesn't mean anything." Hannah made a promise. "Son, promises get broken out here all the time. Life happens." Henry mounted his horse again. "Your pa's a good man. Don't waste your youth on a ghost." As Henry rode away, James clutched the porch railing. He wasn't waiting on a ghost. Hannah was real, and her promise was real. Something must have delayed her. Perhaps her father had fallen ill, or their wagon had broken down. There were countless possibilities that didn't involve her breaking her word. The afternoon stretched into evening, and still James remained at his post. Inside the house, Jonathan prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, occasionally glancing out the window at his son's silhouette. When darkness fell, James finally came inside, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "She didn't come today," he admitted, dropping into a chair at the kitchen table. Jonathan placed a plate in front of his son. "Eat something, there's always tomorrow." James picked at his food without enthusiasm. "Henry says the Lawsons are already settled in Sacramento." "That would make sense," Jonathan replied carefully. Harold Lawson was determined to start fresh after losing his mine claim here. But Hannah promised. James pushed his plate away. "She wouldn't just forget about me, Pa. Something's wrong. I can feel it." Jonathan studied his son, recognizing the same determined set of jaw that his late wife had possessed. "What exactly did Hannah say to you, James?" Her exact words. James looked up, surprise evident on his face that his father was finally taking his convictions seriously. She said, "I'll find a way back in 3 weeks. Wait for me." Then she kissed me and said she loved me. Jonathan nodded slowly. "And you believe she meant it?" "With all my heart." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, thinking, Harold Lawson is a proud man. He wouldn't take kindly to his daughter defying him to return here. "But you've always said if something matters enough, you find a way." "That I have." Jonathan sighed, memories of his own youth flashing before him. He'd once crossed 3 states to follow James's mother when her family had tried to separate them. "Tell you what, give it 1 more week. If she hasn't arrived by then, we'll see what we can find out about the Lawsons in California." Hope flickered in James's eyes. "You do that." "I do that because I trust your judgment, son. If Hannah Lawson made you a promise and you believe in it this strongly, then there might be more to the story." That night, James barely slept. His mind raced with possibilities. What if Hannah had tried to leave Sacramento but had run into trouble? The roads were dangerous for a young woman traveling alone. Bandits, illness, accidents, the frontier was fraught with perils. By dawn, he had made up his mind. He wouldn't just wait passively anymore. He'd start making inquiries, perhaps send telegrams to Sacramento. There had to be a way to find out what had happened. As the first light broke over the eastern hills, James was already dressed and heading to the stables when he heard the distant sound of wheels and horses approaching the ranch. His heart pounded as he ran to the front of the house, shading his eyes against the rising sun. There, silhouetted against the golden light, was a small wagon drawn by a single horse, making its way slowly down the long dirt road to the Mitchell ranch. James stood frozen, hardly daring to believe. As the wagon drew closer, he could make out a solitary figure driving it, a figure in a blue dress, with honey-colored hair catching the morning light. "Hannah," he whispered, then louder, "Hannah." He was running now, kicking up dust as he sprinted down the road. The wagon stopped, and Hannah Lawson, 18 and more beautiful than he remembered, climbed down, her face breaking into a radiant smile. "James," she cried, running toward him. They collided in a fierce embrace, James lifting her off her feet and spinning her around, both laughing and crying at once. "You came back," he said, setting her down but keeping her close. "You really came back." Hannah's eyes shimmered with tears. "I promised, didn't I?" "Though I'm a few days late, the journey was complicated." James searched her face, noting new lines of weariness around her eyes. "What happened? Your family settled in Sacramento, Henry told me." Hannah nodded, her expression growing serious. "They did. Father found work with a merchant there. He's determined to build a new life." She took a deep breath. "But I couldn't stay. This is my home, James. You're my home." James touched her cheek, still hardly believing she was real. "How did you convince your father to let you return?" A shadow crossed Hannah's face. "I didn't. I left in the night 3 days after we arrived. I saved enough from selling Mother's silver brooch to buy this old wagon and horse." She glanced back at the modest conveyance. "It's not much, but it got me here." James stared at her in shock. "You traveled all that way alone?" "Hannah, that's over 800 miles of dangerous country." She lifted her chin. "I wasn't completely alone. I joined a trading caravan for most of the journey. The leader, Mrs. Wilkins, took pity on me, said she'd done something similar in her youth." A small smile played at her lips. "I worked as their cook to pay my way." James shook his head in wonder. "Your father will be furious." "He already is," Hannah admitted. "I left a letter. He'll know where I've gone by now." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for James's. "I'm 18, James. Old enough to make my own choices, and I choose you if you'll still have me." "If I'll still," James broke off with a laugh of disbelief. "Hannah Lawson, I've been waiting on that porch every day since you left, telling anyone who'd listen that you were coming back. Of course I still want you." The sound of the front door opening made them both turn. Jonathan Mitchell stood there, pulling on his coat, clearly having been roused by the commotion. "Mr. Mitchell," Hannah called, straightening her dress nervously. Jonathan stared for a long moment before a slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, walking toward them. "Miss Lawson, you've caused quite a stir in this household." Hannah lowered her eyes. "I apologize for that, sir." No need, Jonathan replied, his voice gentler than James had heard in years. My son said you'd keep your promise. Seems he was right. He glanced at the small wagon. Is that all you brought with you? Yes, sir. I couldn't take much without raising suspicion. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully. You must be exhausted. Come inside. We've got plenty of coffee, and I reckon I can manage some flapjacks. As they walked toward the house, Jonathan pulled James slightly aside. Your young lady has spirit, he murmured. But you realize her father won't just let this lie. Harold Lawson isn't a man who accepts defeat easily. James nodded, watching Hannah climb the porch steps. I know, but neither am I. That's what worries me, Jonathan sighed. Go on in, we'll figure this out after breakfast. Inside, Hannah sat at the kitchen table while Jonathan busied himself with breakfast preparations. James couldn't stop staring at her, afraid she might vanish if he looked away. Tell us about your journey, Jonathan prompted, placing a steaming cup of coffee before her. Hannah wrapped her hands around the mug gratefully. It was difficult at first. I'd never traveled alone before. The first night I was so frightened I barely slept. She sipped the coffee, color returning to her tired face. But then I met Mrs. Wilkins and her trading group in Reno. They were heading east with textiles and household goods. She could tell I was running from something, I think, but she didn't pry. Sounds like a wise woman, Jonathan commented. She was, taught me to shoot a rifle too. Hannah's eyes twinkled at James's surprised expression. Said no woman should cross the territory without knowing how to defend herself. And your father has no idea where you are? James asked. Hannah's expression sobered. My letter only said I was returning to Wyoming, to the place that felt like home. I didn't mention you specifically, though I'm sure he'll figure it out. She hesitated. Father has. Changed since we lost the mine claim. He's bitter, angry at the world. When Mother died last winter, something in him hardened. That's why he was so desperate to leave too many ghosts here. Jonathan placed a plate of flapjacks before her. Grief affects men differently. Some run from it, others face it head-on. Like you did, Pa, James said quietly. Jonathan nodded, a flash of old pain crossing his features. It wasn't easy, still isn't some days. He turned back to the stove. Eat up, both of you. We've got decisions to make. As they ate, James couldn't help thinking about the complications Hannah's return would bring. Harold Lawson was influential, even from a distance. If he decided to come after his daughter, things could get ugly. What are your plans now, Miss Lawson? Jonathan asked, joining them at the table with his own plate. Hannah straightened her shoulders. I have some savings, not much, but enough to rent a small room in town while I look for work. Mrs. Billings at the general store always said she could use help. Nonsense, Jonathan said firmly. We've got the old cabin by the creek. My foreman used it before he built his own place. It needs some fixing up, but it's solid. You'll stay there. Hannah blinked in surprise. Mr. Mitchell, I couldn't impose. It's not imposing if I'm offering. Besides, it's close enough to keep an eye on you, but far enough to maintain propriety. He gave James a pointed look. I won't have folks talking. James felt a flush creep up his neck. Pa's right, Hannah. It's safer here, especially until we know what your father might do. Hannah looked between them, eyes shining with gratitude. Thank you, both of you. After breakfast, they rode out to inspect the cabin. It was small but sturdy, situated on a gentle slope overlooking a bubbling creek. Inside was basic a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed frame, and little else. It's perfect, Hannah declared, running her hand along the dusty windowsill. It just needs a woman's touch. Jonathan nodded, pleased. James and I will repair that sagging porch step and check the roof. There are some extra linens in the attic at the house you can use. As his father outlined the necessary repairs, James watched Hannah move about the small space, already planning where things would go. His heart swelled with emotion. She'd given up everything, her family, her security, her home, to come back to him. He silently vowed to make sure she never regretted that decision. It took 3 days of hard work to make the cabin properly habitable. Hannah cleaned while James and his father repaired. The ranch hands, curious about the new arrival, pitched in when they could, bringing small housewarming gifts, a handcrafted broom, dried herbs for cooking, a colorful quilt one of them had won in a poker game. By the fourth day, Hannah was settled in her new home. That evening, James walked her back from dinner at the main house, the setting sun casting long shadows across the rolling landscape. "Are you happy here?" he asked as they approached the cabin. Hannah smiled up at him, her face aglow in the golden light. "Happier than I've been in a long time. It feels right, James, like I've finally found where I belong." He took her hand, marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. "I want to court you properly, Hannah. I know we're young, but I've never been more certain of anything." She squeezed his hand. "I'd like that." They reached her porch, and James reluctantly released her hand. "Pa says I can ride into town tomorrow for supplies. Need anything? Perhaps some seeds for a small garden." "It's not too late to plant a few things." "Seeds it is." He lingered, reluctant to leave. "Sleep well, Hannah." She rose on tiptoes and kissed his cheek, her lips soft against his skin. "Good night, James." As he walked back to the main house, James couldn't keep the smile from his face. The empty feeling that had haunted him since Hannah's departure was gone, replaced by a sense of rightness and possibility. The next morning, James rode into Wildroot Creek, a list of supplies in his pocket. The small town was bustling with its usual activity, miners heading to the remaining claims in the hills, ranchers trading cattle, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts. At the general store, Mrs. Billings greeted him warmly. "James Mitchell, haven't seen you in weeks. Your pa said you were keeping to the ranch these days." James smiled as he handed over his list. "Had some important waiting to do, Mrs. Billings." The older woman adjusted her spectacles to read the list. "Seeds, planting a garden, are you?" "Not for me. Hannah Lawson is back. She's staying in our old creek cabin." Mrs. Billings's eyebrows shot up. "Hannah Lawson, but I heard the family moved to California." "They did." She came back on her own, understanding dawned in the shopkeeper's eyes. "I see. Well, that explains why you were waiting." She began gathering his items. "Does her father know she's returned?" James's smile faltered. "Not yet, but we expect he'll find out soon enough." Mrs. Billings pursed her lips. "Harold Lawson isn't a man who takes kindly to having his plans disrupted. You'd best be prepared." "We will be," James assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. What exactly would Harold Lawson do when he discovered his daughter's whereabouts? As Mrs. Billings wrapped his purchases, the telegraph operator, Charlie Wilson, burst into the store, his face flushed with excitement. "James. Thought I might find you here. Got a telegraph for your father." He thrust a yellow paper toward James. "Seemed urgent, so I figured I'd deliver it personally." James took the telegram, a sense of foreboding washing over him as he read. "Mitchell, stop. If my daughter is with you, send her home immediately. Stop. Will arrive within fortnight to collect her. Stop. Harold Lawson. Stop. Bad news?" Mrs. Billings asked, noting his expression. James folded the paper carefully. "Hannah's father, he's coming for her." Charlie whistled low. "Harold Lawson's not a man to cross. My cousin works the Sacramento line, says Lawson's made some powerful friends out there already." James pocketed the telegram. "Thank you for bringing this, Charlie. I'll make sure my father sees it." He gathered his purchases, his earlier good mood evaporated. "Mrs. Billings, could you add some extra coffee to my order? I think we're going to need it." The ride back to the ranch seemed twice as long with the weight of the telegram in his pocket. James's mind raced with possibilities, none of them pleasant. Harold Lawson had always been imposing, tall, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that few men challenged. After losing his mine claim, that commanding presence had taken on a harder edge, his temper flaring at the slightest provocation. At the ranch, James found his father mending tack in the barn. "Pa," he called, dismounting. "Got a telegram in town." Jonathan looked up, reading his son's troubled expression. "From Harold Lawson, I presume." James handed over the yellow paper. "He knows Hannah's here, says he's coming to collect her." Jonathan read the message, his jaw tightening. "In a fortnight, that gives us some time at least." "Time for what? Hannah's 18. He can't force her to go back." "Legally, no, but Harold Lawson doesn't always play by the rules." Jonathan folded the telegram thoughtfully. "We need to be ready for whatever he brings with him." "Should we tell Hannah?" Jonathan nodded. "No sense hiding it. Better she's prepared than taken by surprise." That evening, they showed Hannah the telegram. She read it silently, her hands trembling slightly. "I knew he would come," she said finally, looking up at them with resolute eyes. "But I won't go back, I can't." "And you won't have to," James assured her, taking her hand. "We'll stand with you." "It won't be easy," Jonathan cautioned. "Your father's not the type to accept defeat graciously." Hannah's expression hardened. "Neither am I, Mr. Mitchell. I may have my mother's looks, but I have my father's stubbornness." She squared her shoulders. "I'll face him when he comes." Over the next few days, life on the ranch continued with a sense of borrowed time. James helped Hannah plant her small garden, both of them consciously avoiding discussion of her father's impending arrival. In the evenings, they would sit on her porch, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. "I always wanted a home like this," Hannah confessed one evening, gesturing to the peaceful setting. "Something simple but beautiful, a place where children could run free." James smiled, imagining children with Hannah's honey-colored hair playing by the creek. "I'd like that too." "A big family, maybe. The ranch has always felt too empty with just Pa and me." "How many children would you want?" she asked, a blush coloring her cheeks. "4 or 5, he answered without hesitation. "Enough to fill a dinner table with laughter." Hannah's eyes sparkled in the fading light. "5 might be ambitious, but I like the sound of it." These quiet moments together strengthened their bond, but the shadow of Harold Lawson's threatened arrival hung over them all. Jonathan began asking ranch hands to take extra shifts watching the road, while James made sure Hannah was never alone for long. A week after receiving the telegram, Jonathan called James to his study. Spread across his desk was a map of the territory. "I've been thinking," he said as James entered. "If Harold comes with the law on his side, a sheriff or marshal from Sacramento, we could be in a difficult position." James frowned. "But Hannah's of legal age. They can't force her to go." "Not legally, no. But a determined father with influential friends might find ways around that." Jonathan traced a line on the map with his finger. "I've marked some alternative routes off our property, places you could go if things get complicated." James studied the map, understanding dawning. "You're suggesting we run. I'm suggesting we have options." Jonathan looked up, his expression grave. "I hope it doesn't come to that, son, but Harold Lawson is unpredictable, especially now that he feels his authority's been challenged." The idea of fleeing with Hannah both thrilled and terrified James. "We'd need supplies, horses." Jonathan nodded. "Already been gathering them. There's a cache at the Line cabin near the North Ridge, enough to get you to my brother's place in Montana if necessary." James was touched by his father's thoroughness. "You've thought of everything?" "That's my job." Jonathan rolled up the map. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that. With any luck, Harold will listen to reason when he arrives." But they had no such luck. 3 days later, well ahead of his projected arrival, Harold Lawson rode onto Mitchell property with 3 hard-faced men flanking him. James was in the corral breaking a young horse when he spotted the riders approaching. He immediately recognized Harold's imposing figure at the lead, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard now streaked with gray. The men with him wore gun belts prominently displayed, their expressions grim. Jumping from the corral, James raced to the house. "Pa, they're here." Jonathan emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "Already, he's earlier than expected." He glanced toward Hannah's cabin. "Get to Hannah, bring her up to the main house, I'll greet our visitors." James nodded, sprinting toward the creek cabin while his father walked calmly to meet the approaching riders. Hannah was hanging laundry when James reached her, her face lighting up at the sight of him until she registered his urgent expression. "What is it?" she asked, dropping a wet shirt back into the basket. "Your father's here, with men." James took her hand. "Pa wants you at the main house." The color drained from Hannah's face, but she squared her shoulders. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." They walked quickly toward the main house, James keeping Hannah slightly behind him as they approached the confrontation already unfolding in the yard. Harold Lawson had dismounted, standing tall before Jonathan, who looked calm but alert. "Mitchell," Harold was saying, his deep voice carrying across the yard, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." No man or woman belongs to another in this territory, Lawson, Jonathan replied evenly. But if you're referring to your daughter, she's right here. Harold's gaze shifted, hardening as it fell on Hannah and James. There you are, girl, pack your things, we're leaving. Hannah stepped forward, her voice remarkably steady. Hello, father, I'm not going anywhere. Harold's face darkened. Don't test me, Hannah. You've embarrassed me enough with this foolish escapade. He gestured to the men behind him. Mr. Daniels here is a deputy marshal from Sacramento. He's kindly agreed to escort us back. One of the men tipped his hat, revealing a tarnished badge. Miss Lawson, he drawled. Your father's been mighty worried about you. James felt a chill. This was exactly what his father had feared, Lawson bringing legal authority, however dubious, into the situation. I left of my own free will, Hannah stated clearly. I'm 18 years old, legally an adult. I don't require an escort anywhere. A daughter's place is with her family, Harold countered, his tone sharpening. Especially after your mother's passing, what would she think of you abandoning your responsibilities? Hannah flinched at the mention of her mother but held her ground. Mother would want me to be happy. She never approved of how you controlled every aspect of our lives. Harold's face flushed with anger. He took a step toward Hannah, but Jonathan moved subtly to block his path. This is my property, Lawson, Jonathan said quietly. And Miss Hannah is here by my invitation. I suggest we all calm down and discuss this civilly. The man with the badge Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Lawson, if the girl is 18 as she claims, there's not much legal standing for forcing her return. Harold shot him a venomous look before composing himself. Very well, Hannah, a word in private, please. Hannah glanced at James, who gave her a reassuring nod. I'll be right here, he promised. With visible reluctance, Hannah followed her father a short distance away, where they spoke in hushed, intense tones. James couldn't hear their words, but he could see Hannah's increasingly distressed expression. What do you think he's saying to her? James asked his father quietly. Nothing good, Jonathan murmured. Stay alert. Those other two men don't look like lawmen to me. After several minutes, Hannah broke away from her father, walking back with tears streaming down her face but determination in her step. I'm staying, she announced firmly. Father, I'm sorry if that disappoints you, but my decision is made. Harold's expression turned to ice. Then you leave me no choice. He turned to his companions. Daniels, show them that other paper. The deputy pulled a document from his vest pocket, looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Mitchell, I have here a statement from Dr. Thomas Ellis of Sacramento declaring Miss Hannah Lawson mentally unsound and in need of family care following the traumatic loss of her mother. James felt as if he'd been struck. That's a lie. It's a legal document signed by a respected physician, Harold countered smugly. Hannah has been distraught since her mother's death, making irrational decisions, running away. Classic signs of hysteria, Hannah gasped. Father, how could you? You know that's not true. Jonathan stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Deputy Daniels, that document holds no authority in Wyoming territory, and I suspect if we wired the territorial governor, we'd find your jurisdiction questionable as well. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Lawson assured me Mr. Lawson misled you, Jonathan interrupted. Now, I suggest you and your companions leave my property before this situation deteriorates further. Harold's face contorted with rage. I will not leave without my daughter. If you force my hand, Mitchell, you'll regret it. The tension in the yard was palpable. James moved closer to Hannah, while Jonathan's hand drifted toward the rifle leaning against the porch post. Nobody needs to get hurt here, Daniels said, clearly recognizing the dangerous turn of events. Mr. Lawson, perhaps we should reconsider. I'm not reconsidering anything, Harold snapped. He fixed Hannah with a hard stare. This is your last chance, girl. Come home willingly, or I'll make life very difficult for these Mitchells. Hannah wiped away her tears, lifting her chin. This is my home now, and if you truly cared for me as a father should, you'd respect my choice. For a moment, something like pain flashed across Harold's features before hardening into resolve. So be it. He turned to his companions. We're leaving, for now. As they mounted their horses, Harold looked back at Jonathan. This isn't over, Mitchell. Not by a long shot. They watched in tense silence as the four riders disappeared down the long drive. Only when they were out of sight did James wrap his arms around Hannah's trembling form. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. She nodded against his chest. "He tried to convince me you only wanted me for the land my mother left me in her will, said you'd discard me once you had it." She pulled back, meeting his eyes. "I know that's not true. My mother's land is worthless anyway, just a small plot near the failed mine." James brushed a tear from her cheek. "I don't care about land, Hannah. I only care about you." Jonathan approached them, his expression grave. "I don't think we've seen the last of your father, Hannah. That man's not one to accept defeat." "What can he do?" James asked. "He has no legal right to force Hannah anywhere." "Legal rights aren't always what determine outcomes out here," Jonathan replied grimly. "We'll need to be vigilant. I don't trust those men he brought with him, especially the two who weren't doing the talking." That night, Jonathan insisted Hannah stay in the main house rather than return to her cabin. James gave up his room to her, taking the sofa in the parlor instead. Outside, two ranch hands kept watch, rifles at the ready. In the morning, they were relieved to find the night had passed without incident. Perhaps Harold Lawson had truly given up and returned to California, but their relief was short-lived. 3 days later, James rode into town for supplies and returned with troubling news. "They're still here," he told his father and Hannah over dinner. "Lawson and his men have taken rooms at the Western Hotel. They've been asking questions all over town about us, about the ranch, about Hannah." Jonathan frowned. "What kind of questions?" "About our finances, mostly, and our water rights." James hesitated. "Sheriff Connors says Lawson's been in his office too, making accusations." Hannah paled. "What kind of accusations?" "That we forced you to stay against your will." "That we're after your inheritance." James reached for her hand across the table. "No one believes him, of course. Everyone in town knows us. But the damage is being done," Jonathan observed. "He's sowing seeds of doubt, trying to turn public opinion." Over the next week, Harold Lawson's campaign against the Mitchells intensified. Rumors spread through Wildroot Creek like wildfire that Jonathan Mitchell was on the verge of bankruptcy, that James had seduced Harold's daughter with false promises, that the Mitchells were squatting on land that rightfully belonged to others. Most townsfolk, who had known the Mitchells for years, dismissed the gossip. But newcomers and those with grievances against the family were more receptive. The situation came to a head when Jonathan rode into town to meet with the bank manager about a routine cattle loan. He returned hours later than expected, his expression thunderous. "The loan's been denied," he announced, hanging his hat with more force than necessary. "Pearson claims our collateral is insufficient, despite approving the same arrangement every spring for the past decade." "That doesn't make sense," James protested. "Our herd is bigger than last year. Apparently, there are questions about our water rights. Pearson hinted that if those questions persist, other loans might be called in early." Jonathan ran a hand through his graying hair. "Lawson's been busy. He must have connections we don't know about." Hannah's face crumpled with guilt. "This is all because of me. He's trying to ruin you to force my return." "No," Jonathan said firmly. "Harold Lawson has had a grudge against me since I refused to invest in his mining venture years ago. This is just his excuse to act on it." But the pressure continued to mount. The following Sunday, when they attended church in town, they found themselves the subject of whispers and sideways glances. The banker's wife, who had always been friendly, pointedly moved to another pew when Hannah sat nearby. After the service, Reverend Simmons approached them in the churchyard. "Jonathan, could I have a word?" They stepped aside, though James remained close enough to hear the minister's troubled words. "There's been talk, Jonathan. Mr. Lawson has been quite vocal about his concerns for his daughters, virtue under your roof." Jonathan's face hardened. "Hannah Lawson is staying in our creek cabin with proper distance and supervision. There's nothing improper happening on my property, Reverend." "I believe you, old friend, but others are less certain. Perhaps if Miss Lawson were to stay with a respectable family in town until this situation resolves, Mrs. Billings has offered her spare room." "That won't be necessary," Jonathan replied firmly. Hannah is under my protection, and there she'll stay. As they rode home, the tension was palpable. Hannah had withdrawn into herself, clearly blaming herself for their predicament. It's going to be all right, James assured her as they neared the ranch. Pa will find a way through this, he always does. But even James's confidence was shaken when they crested the final hill and saw smoke rising from the direction of Hannah's cabin. Fire! Jonathan shouted, spurring his horse forward. They galloped the remaining distance, arriving to find the small cabin engulfed in flames. 2 ranch hands were already there, frantically trying to douse the fire with buckets from the creek, but it was clear the structure couldn't be saved. What happened? Jonathan demanded, dismounting. One of the hands, Tom Parker, wiped soot from his face. Don't rightly know, Mr. Mitchell. I was checking fences nearby and spotted the smoke. Nobody was around when I got here. James helped Hannah down from her horse, holding her steady as she stared at the burning cabin in shock. All my things, she whispered. Everything I brought from California. Things can be replaced, James said gently. The important thing is you weren't inside. Jonathan surveyed the scene with a grim expression. This was deliberate. Someone wanted to send a message. Lawson, James asked, though he already knew the answer. Most likely, though we'll never prove it. Jonathan put a comforting hand on Hannah's shoulder. I'm sorry, my dear. You'll stay in the main house from now on. We'll keep watch in shifts. That night, as Hannah slept in James's room, Jonathan and his son sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. We can't keep going like this, James said. Lawson won't stop until he gets what he wants. Jonathan nodded, looking older than his years. I've been thinking the same. The fire today was just the beginning. Next time, it could be the barn or worse. What do we do? Jonathan reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch, sliding it across the table. Your mother's wedding ring. I've been saving it for when the time was right. James stared at the pouch, then at his father. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you make an honest woman of Hannah Lawson, and soon. Her father can't force a married woman to return home, not without challenging the legality of the marriage itself. James picked up the pouch, feeling its weight in his palm. I've wanted to ask her, but with everything that's happened. Sometimes circumstances force our hand, Jonathan said, but that doesn't mean the feeling behind it isn't real. He studied his son's face. You do love her, don't you? More than anything, James answered without hesitation. But what about your plans for me to finish school back east? You've always said education was important. Jonathan smiled sadly. Some educations come from books, others from life. I think you're getting the latter kind. He stood, squeezing James's shoulder. Talk to Hannah. If she agrees, Reverend Simmons will perform the ceremony, regardless of town gossip. The next morning, James rose early, slipping the ring pouch into his pocket. He found Hannah on the back porch, watching the sunrise with a cup of coffee cradled in her hands. Mind if I join you? He asked. She smiled, making room on the bench. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what your father said, that the fire was just the beginning. James nodded, gathering his courage. Hannah, I need to ask you something important. She turned to face him, her eyes curious. What is it? He took her hands in his, suddenly aware that this wasn't how he'd imagined proposing, both of them exhausted and worried, the smell of smoke still clinging to their clothes. This isn't how I planned to do this, he began. I always thought I'd court you properly first, take you on picnics by the creek, dance with you at the Founders' Day celebration. Hannah's eyes widened as she realized where this was heading. But circumstances have a way of changing plans, James continued. What hasn't changed is how I feel about you. He pulled the ring from his pocket with slightly trembling fingers. I love you, Hannah Lawson. I think I have since the first day you arrived in Wildroot Creek 3 years ago, looking so out of place in your fancy Eastern dress. A smile broke across Hannah's face, tears gathering in her eyes. I don't have much to offer yet, James admitted. Just a share in this ranch someday and a promise to work hard every day to make you happy. He opened the pouch, revealing a simple gold band with a small sapphire. Will you marry me, Hannah, not just to solve our current troubles, but because I want to spend my life with you? Hannah's tears spilled over, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you, James Mitchell. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his mother's ring, now Hannah's, and kissed her with all the emotion of the past turbulent weeks. When they parted, Hannah looked down at the ring in wonder. It's beautiful. It was my mother's, James explained. Pa's been saving it. He's the one who suggested. He trailed off, not wanting to imply that the proposal was solely his father's idea. Hannah touched his cheek gently. I know the timing is because of my father, but that doesn't make your words any less true or my answer any less certain. Her eyes shone with determination. I want to be your wife, James. I have for a long time. Relief washed over him. Then we'll speak to Reverend Simmons today. The sooner we're married, the sooner your father loses his claim over you. He'll be furious, Hannah warned. Let him be, James replied, pulling her close. You're worth it. They rode into town later that morning, James, Hannah, and Jonathan, presenting a united front as they made their way to the parsonage behind the church. Reverend Simmons listened to their request with a thoughtful expression. I understand your urgency, he said when they'd finished explaining. And I've known you both since you were children. Under normal circumstances, I'd have no hesitation. He sighed, glancing toward the church. But Harold Lawson has been a regular attendee this past week, making substantial donations to our building fund. Are you saying you won't marry us? James asked incredulously. I'm saying there are complications. Mr. Lawson has claimed his daughter is unwell, not of sound mind to make such a decision. That's a lie, Hannah insisted. I've never been more certain of anything. Reverend Simmons studied her determined expression. I believe you, my dear, but as a man of God, I must consider all aspects. He thought for a moment. There is a way. Judge Thompson in Mill Creek owes me a favor. He could perform a civil ceremony which would be just as binding legally. Mill Creek is a day's ride, Jonathan pointed out. Yes, but Mr. Lawson is unlikely to look for you there. And once the deed is done, not even Harold Lawson can undo it without significant legal challenge. They agreed to the plan. They would leave at dawn the next day, hopefully reaching Mill Creek by nightfall. The judge would perform the ceremony, and they would return as husband and wife, presenting Harold Lawson with a fait accompli. As they left the parsonage, James felt a new sense of purpose. They had a plan now, a clear path forward. But as they turned onto the main street, that sense of security evaporated. Harold Lawson stood outside the general store, deep in conversation with the deputy marshal and his other two companions. Keep walking, Jonathan murmured. Don't make eye contact, but it was too late. Harold had spotted them, his conversation cutting off abruptly as his gaze locked on Hannah. Daughter, he called loudly, striding toward them. Out for a family stroll with your kidnappers. People on the street paused to watch the confrontation, some moving closer with undisguised curiosity. They're not kidnappers, father, Hannah replied evenly. They're my friends, and soon my family. Harold's eyes narrowed, then dropped to her hand where the sapphire ring glinted in the sunlight. His face darkened with fury. So that's your game, Mitchell, he spat. Marry your boy to my daughter to get access to her inheritance. Hannah has made her choice, Jonathan replied calmly. If you truly cared for her happiness, you'd respect that. Happiness? Harold scoffed. She doesn't know what will make her happy. She's a confused, grieving girl who needs guidance, not some ranch boy's empty promises. James stepped forward, his patience at an end. Mr. Lawson, I love your daughter. I have for years. I'm going to marry her with or without your blessing. For a moment, genuine pain flashed across Harold's features. She's all I have left of her mother, he said, his voice suddenly hollow. Can't you understand that, after Catherine died, Mother would want me to follow my heart, Hannah interjected gently. She always said that was what mattered most. Harold's expression hardened again. Your mother was a romantic fool who died young because of it. I won't let you make the same mistake. He turned to his companions. Daniels, you witnessed this. They've admitted their intention to force my daughter into marriage against my wishes. The deputy marshal looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Lawson, as I've explained, if your daughter is of legal age, she is not of sound mind, Harold thundered, causing several onlookers to flinch. That doctor's certificate proves it. A certificate from a doctor I've never met for an examination that never happened, Hannah countered, her voice carrying clearly to the gathered crowd. Everyone here has known me for years. Do I seem unsound to you? Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Mrs. Billings, who had emerged from her store, called out, "The girl's talking sense, Harold Lawson, more sense than you are right now." Harold's face flushed with rage and embarrassment. "This isn't over," he hissed, backing away, "not by a long shot." He stalked off, his companions trailing behind him. The crowd slowly dispersed, many offering supportive nods or words to Hannah as they passed. Mrs. Billings approached, patting Hannah's arm. "Don't you worry, dear. That father of yours can bluster all he wants, but folks here know the truth." As they mounted their horses to return to the ranch, James felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The confrontation had gone better than expected, with the townsfolk seemingly on their side. But Harold Lawson's parting words hung ominously in the air. "We should leave for Mill Creek tonight," Jonathan suggested as they rode. "No sense waiting until morning now that Lawson knows our intentions." James nodded, glancing at Hannah. "Are you up for that?" "I'd ride all night if it meant becoming your wife sooner," she replied with a determination that warmed his heart. They spent the afternoon making hasty preparations. Hannah packed what few possessions she had left after the cabin fire. Jonathan arranged for the ranch hands to maintain vigilance in their absence, with Tom Parker taking temporary charge of operations. As dusk fell, they set out, taking a less traveled trail that would lead them to Mill Creek by a roundabout route. The night was clear, the stars providing ample light for their journey. "Your father didn't follow us," Hannah observed after they'd ridden for several hours. "Not yet," James replied cautiously, "but I wouldn't put it past him to figure out our plan." They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had covered significant ground, the terrain changing from the familiar rolling hills of their ranch to more rugged country. "We should reach Mill Creek by midday," Jonathan said as they ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack. "Judge Thompson usually holds court in the morning, so we might catch him at the courthouse." They continued their journey, each lost in their own thoughts. James found himself mentally rehearsing the vows he would soon speak, the commitment he would make to Hannah. Despite the circumstances forcing their hand, his heart was full of certainty. Around noon, they crested a hill and saw Mill Creek spread before them, a bustling town larger than Wildroot Creek, with a proper courthouse and several streets of businesses. "We made it," Hannah said, relief evident in her voice. They rode directly to the courthouse, a substantial wooden building in the town center. Inside, they found the clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Judge Thompson?" Jonathan inquired. "Reverend Simmons from Wildroot Creek said he might be available for a civil ceremony today." The clerk adjusted his spectacles. "The judge finished court an hour ago. He usually takes lunch at the Silver Dollar about now." They thanked him and hurried to the Silver Dollar Saloon, finding Judge Thompson, a portly man with impressive mutton chop whiskers, enjoying a steak at a corner table. "Judge Thompson," Jonathan approached, "I'm Jonathan Mitchell from Wildroot Creek. Reverend Simmons sent word about us." The judge looked up, chewing thoughtfully. "Ah, yes, the urgent wedding matter." His eyes moved to James and Hannah. "These would be the young couple, I presume." "Yes, sir," James replied, keeping a protective arm around Hannah. "James Mitchell and Hannah Lawson." Judge Thompson wiped his mouth with a napkin. Simmons explained the situation, father objecting, claiming mental incompetence. At Hannah's nod, he harumphed. "Seen that before. Rarely holds water if the bride is clearly of sound mind." He studied Hannah carefully. "You seem perfectly rational to me, young lady." "Thank you, Judge," Hannah replied. "Very well, let me finish my lunch and we'll proceed with the ceremony at the courthouse in, say, 1 hour." He glanced at Hannah's travel-worn appearance. "That'll give you time to freshen up if you'd like. The hotel across the street has rooms if you need to rest." They secured 2 rooms at the hotel, one for Hannah and one for James and his father to share. Hannah gratefully accepted the opportunity to wash away the dust of travel and change into the one clean dress. She'd brought a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. When she emerged, James was waiting in the lobby, having also cleaned up as best he could. His breath caught at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said softly. Hannah smiled, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. "Are you nervous?" "Only about getting the words right," he admitted. "Not about marrying you." They walked to the courthouse hand in hand, Jonathan following a few paces behind to give them this moment together. The judge was waiting in his chambers, two courthouse clerks standing by to serve as witnesses. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Judge Thompson spoke briefly about the responsibilities of marriage, then asked them to join hands and exchange vows. James spoke from his heart, promising to love, honor, and protect Hannah all the days of his life. Hannah's voice trembled slightly as she made the same promises to him. When Judge Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Hannah with a tenderness that belied the urgency that had brought them to this moment. She was his wife now legally, irrevocably his wife, and no one, not even Harold Lawson, could separate them. After signing the marriage certificate, they thanked the judge profusely. "Keep this safe," Judge Thompson advised, handing the document to James. "It's your protection against any future claims by your father-in-law." "We will," James promised, carefully folding the certificate and tucking it into his inner pocket. As they emerged from the courthouse, Jonathan clapped James on the shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of you today, son, and of you too, Hannah. Welcome to the family officially." Hannah embraced him, tears of happiness in her eyes. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Mitchell. I think Pa would be more appropriate now, don't you?" Jonathan said with a smile. Their journey back to Wildroot Creek was more leisurely than their urgent ride to Mill Creek. They spent the night at a small inn, Jonathan tactfully taking a separate room to give the newlyweds privacy. Alone for the first time as husband and wife, James and Hannah found both shyness and urgency in their newfound intimacy. Their love, which had grown steadily through years of friendship and recent adversity, blossomed fully in the quiet darkness of the inn's small room. "I never thought happiness could feel like this," Hannah whispered as they lay together, the moonlight casting soft shadows through the thin curtains. James traced the contours of her face with gentle fingers. "I'll spend every day trying to make you feel this happy, even when I'm old and gray," she teased. "Especially then," he promised, sealing the vow with a kiss. They returned to the Mitchell Ranch the following afternoon, unsure what reception awaited them. To their relief, everything seemed peaceful. No sign of Harold Lawson or his companions. Tom Parker greeted them at the gate. "All quiet here, Mr. Mitchell. No trouble while you were gone." "Any sign of Lawson?" Jonathan asked as they dismounted. "None. Sheriff Connors rode out yesterday looking for you, though. Said to tell you Lawson and his men checked out of the Western Hotel. Looked like they were heading back to California." James exchanged a surprised glance with Hannah. "He's given up, maybe," Jonathan replied cautiously. "Or maybe he's regrouping." As they approached the house, ranch hands emerged to greet them, offering congratulations to the newlyweds. Word had clearly spread about their journey to Mill Creek. "We fixed up the foreman's old cabin for you too," Tom announced proudly. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing until you can rebuild the creek cabin." Touched by the gesture, Hannah and James rode with Tom to inspect their temporary home. The foreman's cabin was small but sturdy, with a fresh coat of whitewash and curtains that Mrs. Parker had donated. "The boys and I added a porch swing," Tom pointed out. "Mrs. Parker said every newlywed home needs one." Hannah's eyes filled with tears at the kindness. "It's perfect, Tom. Please thank everyone for us." That evening, they hosted a small celebration at the main house, with the ranch hands and their families joining for a simple supper that turned festive with music and dancing. Jonathan watched with evident satisfaction as James twirled his bride around the cleared living room, both of them laughing with unrestrained joy. Late in the evening, as the celebration wound down, Sheriff Connors rode up, his expression serious. "Mitchell," he called, dismounting stiffly. "Need a word?" Jonathan led him inside to the study, James and Hannah following with apprehension. "What is it, Sheriff?" Jonathan asked once the door was closed. "Lawson's gone right enough," Connors confirmed, "but he left something behind." He withdrew an official-looking document from his vest pocket. Filed this with the county clerk before he left. Jonathan took the paper, reading it with a deepening frown. "What is it, Pa?" James asked. "A legal challenge." "Lawson is petitioning the territorial court to declare Hannah incompetent and your marriage invalid." Jonathan handed the document to James. "He's claiming you took advantage of her fragile mental state." Hannah paled. "But we have the judge's certification that I was of sound mind when we married." "And that will help," Connors assured her. "But Lawson's hired Whitman as his lawyer, the best in the territory. This could get messy." "When is the hearing?" James asked, scanning the document. "3 weeks from now in Cheyenne. You'll all need to appear." Connors hesitated. "There's something else." Lawson was asking a lot of questions about the Mitchell property lines, especially that disputed section near Crow Creek. Jonathan's expression darkened. "That land has been settled for years. The survey clearly shows it's part of our ranch." "Not according to some old maps," Lawson dug up. "He's claiming the survey was done incorrectly, and that parcel actually belongs to what was once Lawson property land his late wife inherited from her family." "So that's his angle," Jonathan said grimly. "He can't force Hannah to return, so he'll try to take part of the ranch instead, the part with our best water access." Over the next 3 weeks, the newlyweds tried to build their life together despite the looming court case. James worked alongside his father and the ranch hands, while Hannah established her new home, planting a small garden and learning to manage a household of her own. In quiet moments, though, the worry would return. What if the court ruled in Harold's favor? What if their marriage was invalidated? The thought was too painful to contemplate. "He won't win," James would assure Hannah when he found her fretting. "Judge Thompson's certification will stand, and we have witnesses who can testify to your sound mind." But as the date of the hearing approached, another concern arose. Hannah had been feeling unwell in the mornings, with certain smells triggering waves of nausea. "You should see Doc Wilson," James suggested one morning after finding her being sick behind the cabin. Hannah blushed, avoiding his eyes. "I don't think that's necessary." "I'm quite certain I know what's causing it." James looked at her blankly for a moment before understanding dawned. "Are you saying are we going to have a baby?" Hannah finished for him, a smile breaking through her pallor. "Yes, I believe we are." Joy coursed through James, momentarily displacing all worry about the upcoming hearing. He gathered Hannah in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his excitement. "A baby," he whispered in awe. "Our baby." "It's early days yet," Hannah cautioned, though her own happiness was evident. "I won't begin to show for months." "We should tell Pa," James said, setting her down gently. "And maybe keep it from the town for now, at least until after the hearing." Hannah nodded agreement. "Your father should know. He's going to be a grandfather after all." Jonathan received the news with quiet joy, embracing both of them. "Life finds a way," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "even in the midst of troubles." The journey to Cheyenne was long and uncomfortable, especially for Hannah with her morning sickness. They traveled by stagecoach, the rough roads testing their endurance. "Are you sure you're all right?" James asked for the dozenth time as the coach hit another rut. Hannah managed a wan smile. "I'm fine, just tired." She leaned against his shoulder. "I'll be glad when this is over and we can go home." In Cheyenne, they checked into a modest hotel near the courthouse. James was surprised to find Reverend Simmons waiting for them in the lobby. "I thought you might need a character witness," the minister explained. "And I wanted to make amends for not performing the ceremony myself." "That's very kind of you, Reverend," Hannah said warmly. The next morning, they presented themselves at the courthouse. The hearing was to be held in a small courtroom with a territorial judge presiding. James felt his stomach knot when he spotted Harold Lawson and his lawyer already seated at one of the tables. Harold looked up as they entered, his eyes lingering on Hannah with an unreadable expression. Was it anger, hurt, regret? James couldn't tell, but he placed a protective arm around his wife as they took their seats. Their own lawyer, Mr. Brooks, joined them moments later. He was younger than Whitman, but had a reputation for tenacity. "Remember," Brooks advised in a low voice, "stay calm, answer only what's asked, and let me handle the objections." The hearing began with the judge, a stern-faced man named Harrington, explaining the nature of the case. Hannah Lawson was petitioning for Hannah to be declared mentally incompetent and for her marriage to be annulled on the grounds that she was not of sound mind to consent. Whitman presented his case first, calling Hannah Lawson to testify. Harold painted a picture of a grief-stricken daughter, traumatized by her mother's death and making irrational decisions as a result. "She abandoned her family, Your Honor," Harold said, his voice breaking convincingly. "Ran away in the night, leaving only a note. This isn't the behavior of a rational person. And what evidence do you have of her mental instability beyond this action?" the judge asked. Harold produced the certificate from the Sacramento doctor. "Dr. Ellis examined my daughter before our departure for California. He noted her melancholy and recommended constant family supervision." When it was Brooks's turn to cross-examine, he approached Harold with deceptive mildness. "Mr. Lawson, when exactly did Dr. Ellis examine your daughter?" Harold shifted slightly. "Shortly before our departure from Wyoming." "Can you be more specific about the date?" "I don't recall the exact day." Brooks nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. Memory can be unreliable." He picked up a document. "I have here a sworn statement from Dr. Ellis's assistant, confirming that no examination of Hannah Lawson appears in the doctor's records for the 3 months prior to your departure from Wyoming." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Harold's face flushed. "He must have forgotten to record it," he blustered. "The examination definitely took place. Or perhaps," Brooks suggested, "the certificate was obtained after the fact, when you realized your daughter had exercised her right as an adult to choose her own path." Whitman jumped up to object, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. When it was their turn to present evidence, Brooks called Hannah to the stand first. She told her story clearly and articulately: her mother's death, her father's increasing bitterness, the move to California against her wishes, and her decision to return to the place and people she loved. "And why did you marry James Mitchell?" Brooks asked gently. Hannah's gaze found James's across the courtroom. "Because I love him," she said simply. "I have for years. We would have married eventually, regardless of my father's objections." Whitman's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to highlight inconsistencies in Hannah's story or moments of emotional distress that could be construed as mental instability. But Hannah remained poised and articulate throughout. "Your Honor," Whitman pressed, "is it not true that grief can cloud judgment? That major life decisions made in the wake of a parent's death might be questionable?" "Grief is not mental incompetence, Mr. Whitman," Hannah replied evenly. "I mourned my mother deeply, and I still do. But my decision to return to Wyoming and marry James was made with a clear mind and an open heart." Next, James testified about his relationship with Hannah, their long friendship, and their plans for the future. Judge Thompson's written statement was entered into evidence, confirming that he had found Hannah of perfectly sound mind when performing the marriage ceremony. Reverend Simmons provided character testimony for both James and Hannah, as did several letters from prominent citizens of Wildroot Creek, including Mrs. Billings and Sheriff Connors. By the end of the day, Hannah Lawson looked deflated, his confident demeanor replaced by a grim acknowledgement of defeat. When the judge called for closing statements, Whitman's arguments sounded hollow compared to Brooks's passionate defense of the young couple's right to determine their own future. "Your Honor," Brooks concluded, "what we have here is not a case of mental incompetence, but of a father unable to accept that his daughter has grown into a woman capable of making her own choices. The law is clear on this matter. At 18, Hannah Lawson Mitchell is legally an adult. Her marriage, performed by a respected judge who verified her competence, is valid and binding. To rule otherwise would be to deny this young woman the very freedom our territorial laws are designed to protect." After a brief recess for deliberation, Judge Harrington returned with his decision. "Having reviewed all evidence presented, I find no compelling reason to declare Hannah Lawson Mitchell mentally incompetent. The petitioner has failed to provide credible medical testimony or consistent behavior patterns that would justify such a serious designation. He looked directly at Harold Lawson. The certificate presented is questionable at best, fraudulent at worst, and will be referred to the medical board for investigation. Harold's face paled. As to the marriage, the judge continued, I find it legally valid and binding. The petition for annulment is denied. He gavelled the session closed. This matter is resolved. The relief that washed over James was overwhelming. He embraced Hannah tightly as their supporters offered congratulations. Harold Lawson sat motionless at his table, staring at nothing. As they prepared to leave the courtroom, Harold approached them, his lawyer vainly trying to hold him back. Hannah, he said, his voice subdued, may I speak with you, privately? James tensed, but Hannah squeezed his hand reassuringly. It's all right, I'll speak with him. They found a quiet corner of the courthouse hallway. James remained within sight but out of earshot, watching the interaction carefully. The conversation appeared intense but not hostile. At one point, Hannah wiped tears from her eyes. Harold's posture, initially rigid, gradually softened. After about 10 minutes, they embraced briefly, and Harold walked away without looking back. What did he say? James asked when Hannah returned to his side. He's dropping the land claim, she said quietly, and he apologized in his way. Said he was so afraid of losing the last connection to Mother that he lost perspective. She took a shaky breath. He's returning to California tomorrow. I don't think we'll see him again for a long time. Are you all right with that? James asked gently, knowing how complicated family relationships could be. Hannah nodded slowly. I am. He's not a bad man, James, just broken by grief and fear. She placed a hand over her still flat stomach. I told him about the baby, that he's going to be a grandfather. How did he take that news? It shocked him. Then he got very quiet and said my mother would have been overjoyed. A small smile touched her lips. He asked me to write to him occasionally to let him know how the child grows. I said I would. And I'll support that, James promised, drawing her close. Our child should know all their family, even the complicated parts. They returned to Wildroot Creek the following day, the stagecoach journey somehow less arduous now that the weight of uncertainty had been lifted. Jonathan was waiting for them, having ridden ahead to prepare the ranch for their return. It's over, James told his father as they embraced. The judge ruled in our favor on all counts, and Harold has dropped the land claim. Jonathan's relief was palpable. Thank God. I was prepared to fight that battle to the end, but I'm glad it won't be necessary. Life gradually returned to normal on the Mitchell ranch. Hannah's morning sickness subsided as the summer progressed, replaced by a healthy glow and a gradually swelling belly. James found himself watching her in wonder, amazed at the miracle growing within her. They rebuilt the creek cabin, making it larger and sturdier than before, with a proper bedroom and a nursery for the coming child. Jonathan spent hours crafting a cradle from pine wood, polishing it to a smooth finish that gleamed in the sunlight. In early December, as the first snows blanketed the Wyoming landscape, Hannah went into labor. The ranch hands rode for the doctor, who arrived in time to help deliver a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's hazel eyes. What will you name him? Jonathan asked as he held his grandson for the first time, his weathered face soft with emotion. James and Hannah exchanged a look before Hannah answered. Henry Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan's eyes misted. That's a fine name. We thought so, James said, his heart so full he could barely speak. That evening, as Hannah rested with baby Henry in their bedroom, James stepped onto the porch of their cabin. The snow had stopped, leaving the world pristine and silent beneath a canopy of stars. He thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, Hannah's courageous return, their hasty wedding, the court battle, and now the miracle of their son. Jonathan joined him, offering a cup of coffee. Penny for your thoughts, son. James smiled, accepting the steaming cup. I was just thinking about that day I sat on the porch, waiting for Hannah's wagon. He shook his head in wonder. I kept telling you she's coming back, I know it. Everyone thought I was a fool. Not everyone, Jonathan corrected gently. I hoped you were right, even when I doubted. That's what fathers do, hope for their children's happiness, even against the odds. I want to be that kind of father to Henry, James said softly, one who believes in him even when the world doesn't. Jonathan clapped a hand on his shoulder. You already are, son, you already are. Inside the cabin, Hannah sang softly to their newborn son, her voice carrying faintly through the window. James closed his eyes, letting the simple melody wash over him. This was what he'd been waiting for all those days on the porch, not just Hannah's return, but the beginning of their life together with all its challenges and joys. I should go back inside, he said, draining his coffee. Hannah will need help through the night, Jonathan nodded. Give them both a kiss for me. As James turned to go, his father added, You know, son, sometimes the best things in life come to those who wait on porches, stubbornly believing in promises. James smiled, thinking of the long-ago summer day when Hannah had kissed his cheek and made her promise. She's coming back, he had insisted to anyone who would listen. Now, as he returned to the warmth of his home where his wife and son waited, James knew that his faith had been rewarded beyond measure. Hannah looked up as he entered, her tired face lighting with love. There you are, she murmured. I was telling Henry about how his stubborn father waited for me on a porch, absolutely certain I'd keep my word. James sat beside them on the bed, gently stroking his son's downy head. And I'll never stop waiting for you, he promised, bending to kiss her, even when you're just in the next room. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering their tracks and softening the hard edges of the world. But inside the small cabin, warmth and love created a shelter stronger than any storm. James Mitchell had waited on a porch for Hannah's wagon, believing with all his heart in her promise to return. Now, with his wife and son in his arms, he knew that some things, the best things, were worth every moment of that wait.